Ever feel like traditional education can be a bit like, well, cramming for a test you're not sure you even want to take? Drill facts, memorize dates, and hope anything sticks.
It's an interesting way to put it, and you're definitely not alone in feeling that way. Many people sense there's something missing in how we often approach education.
And that's what makes today's deep dive so exciting. We're going back in time, exploring the work of Charlotte Mason, a true educational revolutionary who was way ahead of her time.
Oh, absolutely. We're diving into a chapter from her book, A Liberal Education in Elementary Schools.
And that title alone probably raises some eyebrows, right?
It does sound a bit formal in today's world.
Okay, so liberal education. Help us unpack that a bit. What did Mason actually mean by that phrase?
Right, you're picking up on how the words themselves have shifted in meaning over time. For Mason, liberal didn't have anything to do with a political stance. She was really using it more in the sense of liberating the mind.
Mm-hmm. I like that, liberating the mind. So freeing children from, say, rote memorization and kind of igniting a passion for learning that hopefully lasts a lifetime, right?
Exactly.
So it's not just about what we learn, but how we approach learning itself. Now, that resonates. But how did she actually see this working in a practical sense? Give us an example.
Imagine, instead of a restrictive diet of just dry textbooks, you offer children a feast of captivating stories, thought-provoking biographies, and scientific adventures, all told in a way that just ignites their imagination. That's essentially what Mason advocated for.
Okay, now that sounds way more exciting than the textbooks I remember. But did it actually work? Did kids really connect with complex material presented in this more engaging way?
That's where it gets really interesting. What Mason observed was that children, when you present them with well-written, compelling narratives, were actually drawn to complex themes and ideas. There's a famous anecdote about how her students just devoured The Pilgrim's Progress.
Wait, really? The Pilgrim's Progress? That's not exactly light reading, even for adults.
Exactly. And yet, children gravitated towards its rich language and allegorical depth. At the same time, she noticed those same students completely rejecting a dry textbook-style explanation of, say, how to be a better person. It was like they intuitively knew what truly nourished their minds,
It's like offering a child a choice between a slice of cake and a plate of broccoli. They're going to go for what sparks their interest. But how do we know they're not just skimming the surface, enjoying the story without really absorbing the deeper meaning?
That's where Mason's concept of narration comes in. And don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds.
Okay, good. Because honestly, sometimes educational jargon makes my head spin. Break it down for us. What is narration all about?
Think of it as storytelling with a purpose. Instead of traditional exams, Mason encouraged children to retell what they'd learned in their own words. This wasn't about spitting back facts, but about digesting the material, making connections, and expressing their understanding in a way that felt natural and engaging to them.
So it's about encouraging deeper comprehension rather than just surface-level memorization, which makes a lot of sense. But did it actually work? Did the kids rise to the occasion?
What's fascinating is that Mason found that when children were given this opportunity to process information in their own way, they often surprised everyone with just how deeply they understood the material. Imagine students producing in-depth written analyses of complex works like Shakespeare, not from rote memorization, but from genuine engagement.
Wow, okay. So we've got this fascinating approach where we're nourishing young minds with a feast of living books and encouraging them to make meaning through narration. But let's get practical. How did Mason actually make this work in a real classroom setting?
Okay, so we've got this incredible image of kids feasting on Shakespeare and discussing the finer points of The Pilgrim's Progress, which is amazing. But I have to ask, how did Mason manage the classroom itself? Was it just intellectual chaos, everyone off on their own literary adventures? That's a great question. And it actually speaks to a core principle of Mason's approach: active participation. So instead of endless lectures and rote memorization, she advocated for shorter, more focused lessons. Think bite-sized pieces of information presented in a way that sparks curiosity.
So less is more.
In a way, yes. It's about quality over quantity. Mason really believed in giving children the space to really digest and process what they're learning, not overwhelming them with a constant barrage of information. It's like she viewed children as explorers in this vast and fascinating world, not empty vessels waiting to be filled.
I love that analogy. It makes me think about how differently kids act when they're genuinely interested in something, right? They become little detectives, asking questions, digging deeper. But with Mason's approach, how did she guide that exploration? Because it's one thing to spark curiosity. It's another to make sure they're actually, learning.
You're so right. And Mason wouldn't disagree with you. She often compared the role of an educator to that of a guide, not a dictator. So the teacher's job wasn't to spoon-feed information, but to create the conditions for learning to flourish.
A guide, not a dictator. I like that. So how did this guide role actually play out in the classroom? Did Mason have any specific strategies or techniques?
One of her most intriguing ideas was this concept of living books.
Okay, tell me more.
So these weren't your dry, dusty textbooks, just filled with facts and facts, but beautifully written narratives that brought subjects to life. Think classic literature, engaging biographies, even science books, written with a sense of wonder and adventure.
So no more dry textbooks or oversimplified summaries.
Not if you wanted to keep those young minds engaged. Mason firmly believed that living books provided a much richer, more nuanced understanding of the world, and that children, frankly, deserve nothing less. These books became the tools for exploration, almost like the maps and compasses for their intellectual journey.
It sounds like a completely different way of experiencing knowledge. Instead of memorizing dates and definitions, children are immersed in stories, characters, and events that bring history, science, literature to life. Did she have specific guidelines for choosing these living books, or was it more about just letting kids loose in the library?
She definitely had strong opinions on what constituted a living book. For Mason, it wasn't enough for a book to be simply factual. It had to have literary merit, engage the imagination, and inspire a sense of wonder.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about absorbing information, but about cultivating a love of language, a sense of beauty, and a desire to learn more. I'm guessing she probably had some pretty strong feelings about the opposite, those dry, overly simplified textbooks that so many of us remember from school.
You're right. Mason believed that simplifying things too much could actually stifle a child's natural curiosity. She saw firsthand how children were drawn to complexity, how they craved challenges, and just reveled in unraveling intricate ideas. Those overly simplified texts were like intellectual junk food. They might be temporarily satisfying, but ultimately lack the nutritional value to truly nourish a growing mind.
Okay, this is all resonating so much with me, but I have to confess, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's one thing to be inspired by these ideas, but where do we even start? Especially if we're not coming from a traditional homeschooling background and don't necessarily have the time or resources to recreate Mason's entire approach.
I hear you. It can feel a bit daunting, but the beauty of Mason's philosophy is that you don't have to do it all at once, and you don't have to do it perfectly. A great starting point is simply by incorporating more living books into your child's reading list.
That feels doable, but how do we even begin to build a library of living books? I'm picturing myself spending hours in the library desperately trying to decipher cryptic recommendations.
Don't worry, you don't have to go it alone. One fantastic resource is actually Mason's own curated book lists. She meticulously compiled titles that she felt exemplified the living books approach across various subjects and age groups. And don't think of these lists as set in stone. They're meant to be springboards for exploration, launching pads for your own family's unique learning journey.
So it's about finding those books that will spark a genuine love of learning, not just checking off boxes on a prescribed list, right?
Yeah.
And we can customize based on our kids' interests, maybe even our own childhood favorites. I love that flexibility. But there's something we haven't touched on yet. This idea of habits of mind. What exactly did Mason mean by that, and how does it fit into her overall philosophy?
Ah, yes. Habits of mind. Almost like a secret ingredient in Mason's recipe for a well-rounded education. And it's a perfect bridge to the practical application of her ideas.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Spill the tea. What is this secret ingredient all about?
Okay, we left off with this secret ingredient, habits of mind. It sounds kind of mysterious, maybe even a little intimidating. Is this where, like, the drill sergeant side of Charlotte Mason comes out?
Not at all. Think of it less like boot camp and more like, tending a garden.
Okay.
It's about creating fertile ground where good habits can naturally blossom, right? You're not forcing children into rigid molds or anything like that, but it's about recognizing the power of habit, that incredible power in shaping character and intellect.
Okay, so less drill sergeant, more master gardener. I like that. But what exactly are we planting in this, metaphorical garden of the mind? What kind of habits are we talking about here? We're talking about qualities like attention, perseverance, truthfulness, those inner strengths that just help children thrive in all areas of life. But then also things like gratitude, compassion, even a sense of wonder. Mason believed these qualities, they weren't just like inborn traits. These were skills you could cultivate through practice, just like learning to play an instrument or ride a bike.
So it's about building those positive mental pathways, those automatic responses that help kids make good choices and approach challenges with, a resilient spirit. But how do we actually encourage those habits to take root? Is it a matter of rewards and punishments? Or,
That's where Mason takes a surprisingly, I think, different approach.
okay, tell me more.
She was actually wary of relying too heavily on like those external motivators.
Interesting.
So instead of stickers and timeouts, she focused on nurturing a child's inner motivation, their own desire to do well and be their best selves.
And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. We all want to feel that sense of intrinsic motivation, that joy in accomplishing something for its own sake. But how do we help, children tap into that inner drive, especially when it comes to things that might not always be, inherently fun, like, say, tidying up their room?
Well, Mason had a knack for breaking things down into, manageable steps.
Yeah.
One of her key insights was the power of small, achievable goals. So instead of overwhelming a child with this daunting task, like clean your entire room, she advocated for breaking it down into smaller, more digestible chunks,
Right. It's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Exactly.
We're not expecting perfection overnight, but rather encouraging those small, consistent efforts that build confidence and, ultimately lead to lasting change.
Exactly. And just as important as those small steps is the role of consistency and repetition. It's not about being perfect, but showing up day after day, making those small efforts, even when we don't feel like it.
So it's like laying down those neural pathways brick by brick until those positive habits become second nature. It's a long-term investment in a child's character and well-being, not, a quick fix.
Right. And just like with any skill, celebrating those small victories along the way is crucial. Acknowledging a child's effort, even if the result isn't perfect, can be so motivating. It reinforces those positive patterns and helps them develop a sense of, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, but like self-efficacy.
Oh, yeah.
That belief that they can actually make progress and achieve their goals.
It's so interesting how much emphasis Mason placed on the environment and the people, we surround ourselves with, not just in a physical sense, but also in terms of the books we read, the stories we consume. It's like she was creating this invisible web of support, this network of inspiration to help children thrive.
That's such a powerful image, and I think it highlights a really crucial aspect of Mason's philosophy.
Yeah.
This idea that we are shaped by the company we keep both in person and through the books and ideas that we encounter. Surrounding children with positive role models, both real and fictional, becomes a vital part of this habit training.
It makes you think about the power of stories, not just as entertainment, but as tools for shaping character and inspiring virtue. And it's not just about protecting children from negative influences, right? Mason also believed in exposing them to challenges, to those stories that, grapple with difficult emotions and complex ethical dilemmas.
Absolutely. Shielding children from the realities of life, that wasn't part of Mason's philosophy at all. She believed that encountering challenges, even, experiencing setbacks, was crucial for building resilience and developing those critical thinking skills. It's about equipping them to navigate the complexities of the real world, not sheltering them from it.
Right. It's like giving them a mental toolkit. Those problem-solving skills and emotional intelligence they need to navigate life's inevitable ups and downs. And through it all, she emphasizes trusting in the inherent goodness and potential of each child, and then creating the conditions for that potential to truly flourish.
That's the heart of Mason's approach, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about molding children into these miniature versions of ourselves, but nurturing their unique gifts and passions. It's about guiding them to become the best versions of themselves, not who we think they should be.
This deep dive has been so incredibly insightful. We've, barely scratched the surface of Charlotte Mason's work, but it's clear that her ideas, though rooted in a very different era, are timelessly relevant.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the beauty of her approach is its adaptability. You can take inspiration from her core principles, that emphasis on living books, the power of narration, the nurturing of good habits, and weave them into your family's life in a way that feels authentic and engaging.
It's about approaching education, and perhaps even life itself, with that same sense of wonder and curiosity that Mason so passionately advocated for. It's about trusting in the inherent capacity of children to learn and grow, and creating the conditions for them to not just succeed, but to truly thrive. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to delve deeper into the world of Charlotte Mason. Until next time, keep those minds curious, those hearts open, and keep those conversations flowing.